Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's a pleasure to be in your company to create a world. Deb is with me, Deb Merchant. We have a long history. She's my mama, she and Russ, and they grew me up. They gave me a place to exist because I was really a weird one. And I'm not so weird anymore. Well, we'll see. We'll see about that. So Deb and I we wanted to be the first ones kind of out of the chute for this conversation to begin what for several of us is a very serious, very significant. And it comes from a place that we're not used to. I mean, there are ways we're used to it in YouTube. You know, we have great videos of kitty cats and doggies and women that cross country on bikes, and a lot of discussing about what things are happening and how we think they should be handled. And there's a lot of that. But we're trying to recreate something, and we actually don't know if we'll succeed or not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we actually don't know. But we want to recreate folks, Folks, that don't know each other, hanging out together. And it can kind of look weird because there's only two of us hanging out here. But Deb will say in a minute a little bit about we want to be live. You know, it says go live when you get on the YouTube channel, and we want to be in the living experience of our lives with you. And when we say what we're paying attention to, I noticed when we began to look at developing this, it meant what are we developing, you know, to contribute. And it isn't really developing something to contribute, is we're developing ourselves to be able to be visible in what we're on the ground experiencing and the things we're being confronted with, and having a friend, in this case, for me, it's Deb, and for Deb, me, and to have a friend to look at it with. And it's our hope. It's more than a hope. We're really grounded. We used to live in community, Deb and I. We were a fairly decent sized community in Washington, D.C., and then in Columbus, Ohio. And we really found that, God, we were able to take hurdles. You know, we were able to be with people when they died, and to be with otherworldly things that we're confronting, and to be with issues happening in the neighborhood, that we weren't alone. And that's as far as I can go in my own ability to be articulate about it. And I'm just going to turn it over to Deb for whatever there is for you to say, honey.
Yeah, there's a lot of us that do live in community. In America, there's a lot of people that do in a lot of different ways, but there's a lot of us that don't. And we've lost touch with what community means. And so Tantra and I are not talking about belonging, like you're in or you're out, you're included or excluded. We're talking about, it's hard to put words to. We're talking about how to be community, how to find it. And in this world where people move so much changes, so much goes so much more quickly than even 50 years ago, it's sort of like, to me, how do you just move in community so you land where you land? Because let's say you move for a new job, you land and reform your community. Or something happens and something's disrupted and you still have to find community. It's like a way of being in the world. So what Tantra said, so you you're heard, you have a place. It's part of the imprint of human being. And we're exploring that. I'm in that exact place in my life, actually. Is a whole lot of things are completing for me. A whole lot of stuff is starting newly. And because of certain things being done, I have actually the time to find people, find community. What does that mean to me? How much of that do I need, physical and tangible and nearby? How much of it is satisfying online because I have people in a lot of different places? What does it mean to me? What does it mean to find a way where I'm heard, I'm supported, and where, let's see how, where what happens is my wisdom is illuminated to take on, and creativity to take on whatever it was that's come up. Part of what I at least want to do, I think Tantra too, in these conversations, is leave you with your wisdom and creativity and thinking opened up for you wherever you are. So that's the beginning of the conversation for today.
Yeah, the on the tagline, you didn't see it, Deb. It says Deb and Tantra in your company to create a world.
Yes.
But it's not like she said, we're not asking you to join us to create a world. We want to imprint the field of creation. Deb, you might want to mute when you're coughing. It's called imprinting or mirror neurons. You can look it up, but we don't feel about it cold-hearted. It's not objectified, like we're going to do it to you. It's more just part of the gift of being human, that if two people, in this case Deb and I, next week will be Janice and Deb, if they're in your company, they're exploring something and they're listening to each other and responding to each other, they're inside this beautiful mechanism of your physical system are these mirror neurons, not to mimic what we say, which is presently how they're used. It's the sound bites on TV. It's the rallying for a cause that people don't even know how to examine the validity of. It's not that. It's the genuine mirror neuring. If two people, and that's what Deb and I will attempt today, if two people are simply, there are two phrases, keep it honest and be real. And if we just be real with each other and we just, not be about anything else than being with each other and being ourselves on behalf of what it might take to create a world, not as an action, but as an exploration and as a discovery. Like I have a story about Joe and Julian today, and Deb may tell her story about, the completion of her job. I don't know. So it's not just philosophy. It's not theory. It's things that we're tenderly, fragilely, emotionally dealing with, because that's where you keep it real. That's where you keep it honest. And I don't mean honest like otherwise you're a liar, but that's, people don't want to feel. We have a lot to feel about. It's uncomfortable to feel, especially in the United States, publicly.
Mm-hmm.
It's challenging to not have the answers, to not be an authority. And there are in areas I am very much an authority, and there are areas Deb is very much an authority. But we really want the folks of it. Let's stimulate each other through these strange people. There's 6 of us at this point, just hanging with each other. And maybe it can give the rest of us a place to to start to feel safe, to maybe be inside of a becoming. I don't mean a becoming of ourselves. We are in a world that is becoming different. And I don't mean different bad. This is why Janice just stayed ruthless about this, is about building the capacity for community. Where you're standing in, and you'll see in my story of Joe and Julian, it was only a 5-day community, but it was a genuine community in those 5 days. And I may never see either of them again, but we did community together, and it was enriching, and it was beautiful, and it was magnificent. Deb?
Yeah, I want to take a minute to talk about mirror neurons, just to fill folks in. We have structures in our brain that, if I walk up to you and you are, well, I don't know, emoting, I don't know, super happy, mad, sad, whatever you are, that the structures in my brain literally mirror that, so I can tell what your facial expression is. And you smile at a baby and they smile back. That's mirroring. That's the mirror neurons. It's the beginning of empathy, compassion, ability to tell what another person's feeling. And then there's that tends to be what's typical. And then there's several neurotypical or neurodiverse ways of being.
Say that last.
Like if someone's on the autism spectrum. So that's that, just to give you a short thing. And then what was the other one I was going to just say, Tantra, just for, well, it'll have to come back to me.
Oh, was it something technical?
No.
It was something in regard to community, or how keeping it honest or keeping it real, any of that? Nothing pinging yet.
Nothing's pinging.
Okay. I'll tell my
It'll
story.
come back.
I'll tell my story of Joe and Julian then.
Yeah.
There's why don't you go ahead and mute and then you can unmute when it's, life happens, and life is always opportunity. And some of it is pleasant and some of it is unpleasant. And if we kind of went the way, and this is where Deb and I really are taking on the challenge, I could easily do some assessments right now, and I could do some euphemisms, and I could do some philosophical statements. But in truth, life happens, and we don't know how we're going to deal with it. And we don't know how it's going to be. And we have a safety, up until recently, have had a safety that we will know how to deal with it, and we will know how we'll be. But things are falling apart. So in truth, we don't know what we're doing, and we don't know how we'll be, which is why we developed CreateAWorld. Because I had about a 5'4", he calls himself a Tex-Mex. That's a Mexican from Texas. Come to my door. He was very nervous. His truck had been stolen. He worked for a landscaper. They're not working right now, and because the boss is on vacation. And he had his bucket and his landscaper hay, and I was in a meeting, and he said, do you have any work? He says, I just felt like I had to come to your door. Do you have any work you want me to do? And our front yard in New Mexico, there are these weeds that really can destroy the entire yard. And we have 2 desert willows that they particularly seem to like to try to choke. And so he said, my name's Joe. And I said, Joe, I'm in a meeting. If you want to just go to work, I'll come out at the end of the hour and we'll discuss price. So I came out at the end of the hour, and in New Mexico, there's one of the things they do, which is stupid, really. They put plastic on the dirt to keep these particular weeds from actually growing up. So they don't grow up where the plastic is, but they grow up along the edge. He had literally moved all the rocks, all the gravel, and he had rolled back all the plastic, and meticulously had pulled the roots of all. I was standing there spellbound. I couldn't believe the speed and the meticulousness of what he had done in an hour. And I said, Joe, I pay $25 an hour, whatever you want to do, I'm yours, go for it. So that started a relationship. And I don't know how to say it. I think it comes from his own words. I drove him home, and on the way home, he said, now think inside the framework of community, that it may have looked like two people talking like in the car separate from each other, but we were really talking community. And he said he had 3 white girls when he was out on the curb, so there's a Mexican, working for a white woman, I hope you're picking up all the garbage. It was incredibly horrible, incredibly rude, and basically throwing garbage at him. And I said, how'd that make you feel, Joe? And he said, I know who I am. He said, I just waited till they were done with their business and let them carry on. And then he said, people shouldn't be that way with each other. As he worked for us for 5 days, sorry. And I discovered a lot. I discovered that his brother, he come here to be with his brother who was bipolar and schizophrenic, so he could be cared for because he was being abused by the landlady and people in the neighborhood. I found out that his brother, it's a large family, had been killed last year, December 10th. I remember the news, a card flipped in the air and come down on a guy listening to his headsets. And his wife was, they were on the border of El Paso, and she was heavy into drugs, and he had to pay the cartel every week his paycheck so that she could survive. Now, I know the thinking. Our thinking is, well, especially New Age thinking, is, well, if he'd just been different, that wouldn't have happened to him. But I was dealing with a man of incredible equity, incredible stature. He got out of jail when he was 19, and he made rules: no drugs, no alcohol, always being fair, always being as best as he could, non-judgmental, and being there for others. And he lived by those rules, and I lived by those rules. So Joe and I had a lot in common. And by the time we were going to Home Depot to get the paint for the wall, I'll send you a picture. We were two people as our own shared community between he and Julian and C and I. We were a little community for 4 days, working everything out together, making sure it worked for them. And our yard is gorgeous, and our wall is also gorgeous. It's gold, as a matter of fact. And so when I went to he was in the front yard. I went to take him back. He had through events that he can't do anything about, which is what started this conversation. He can't fight the system. He's going to go back to Arizona, and then the social worker for Julian is going to find him another place safer and free from harm. But she has to have time to do that. And as long as he's with Julian, they're being hounded, they're being harassed, they're having phones stolen, and things most of us imagine can be our everyday life. And to see this man with incredible stature, incredible honesty, incredible communication skills, and really working it out together. Like when we went in to buy paint and stuff, he never has lost his stature through all of that. And I came out the door to tell him I was ready, and he was standing in our front yard blessing our house and our yard and thanking Jesus for the ladies that lived there and for the opportunity that he had to get back on his feet again. And when Janice and I talked about the initial aspect of CreateAWorld, the underpinning of everything is if we can just keep getting back on our feet. And Joe got to get back on his feet. And I've never been so emotional after I'd taken him home. And actually, C took him home. And when she came back, I was so emotional because it was right world for me. Wrong circumstances, big, big wrong circumstances, but right world. Because Joe and I and C created a world, and Julian still has my number if he needs me. And this thing that happens in culture where we're so distant from each other, usually because we can't do anything about some things. We just can't do anything about it. And and Carol, she's one of our community members, global community members of CreateAWorld, in the field of Tantra. She's an investigative reporter, and she totally laid it out for me. And then my daughter, who works in the underprivileged, she totally laid it out for me, the impossibility of it working out. But guess what? It might work out. Joe's going to go to Arizona, get all his papers, work with a social worker while she finds a place for them here so he can come back and take care of his brother. You know what? It just might work out. And I said to Carol when I realized, because it could also put me in danger. They've threatened Joe because he doesn't sell his brother's drugs. And I knew, and I said to Carol, I may not know what to do, and I may not dare do anything for my own safety, but it doesn't mean I won't have a voice. And so today I get to have that voice. And those of you in the viewing audience, if there's anything you want to come on CreateAWorld with, to give it a place, we're gonna drive ourselves nuts in the face of unworkability and systems collapsing. But if we have the nuggets of creating community, as Deb said, wherever we can, or being community when it gives us the opportunity. Joe and Julian gave me the opportunity to be community. Actually, even made me a quesadilla with ham and bacon and cheese. It was filling. And we bought him lunch. It's not a charity, it's community. Deb.
Yeah, there's so much that's beautiful and rich in there about finding your voice, having your voice. Every choice that Joe made to be honest, integrous, kind, to bless your house, all of that is having your voice. The system is unworkable, what he's got to deal with and what he's working through. But in the meantime, he has lots of ways that he has a voice, not just through words, but through ways of being or whatever, actions. And I find that so strong, so beautiful. And it's part of what may have, I don't know, could we call it a miracle? Could we call it, who knows what we could call it? But he could have it happen. He could have what he needs to happen. But it isn't only about that, at least not in today's conversation.
I want to say one thing about that, Deb.
Mm-hmm.
I really want to stay in the integrity of the listening. Joe and I and C did this together.
That's right.
There was complete equity. We worked through every job.
Yep.
We worked through every price. We worked through the hours. We worked through what needed to happen. And it was completely a shared action. Then he got benefit out of it. And oh my God, did we get benefit out of it? Go ahead.
And that's the next layer of voice that I'm pointing to also. The shared interaction, and it kind of happens. There's a certain amount of words, like I'll pay $25 an hour and I want these weeds gone kind of words. But then there's everything else that comes from moving with other human beings who knows how that happens or what that is that has us just have our cadence. It has us have that shared humanity together. I consider that voice also. I really consider that voice. And in that sense, I suppose it's four voices going together, working together, singing together, as it were. But since Tantra brought up the topic with me about, and we've been engaging with, the ideas of having a voice, even when there's something completely intractable. The system's not working, systems are breaking down, and things get really, really messy before they reorganize again. But each kind of thing, like what she's talking about with Joe, helps bring things to the next greater whole, meaning every time their life is always working in a certain pattern. And most of us have probably heard that phrase, life has a way, life finds a way, sorry. And that's, everything's always moving to the next greater whole. Life will always take the parts that exist and move them to something life enhancing. So everybody always has a voice. I was thinking of a couple of examples before the call and before she talked about Joe. Like, there's a lot of lack of equity in monetary systems in society, Western society right now. That's no surprise to anybody. But where do we have a voice? We have a voice by, one of the things I do is pick fair trade coffee. So when I'm drinking my coffee, I've paid for coffee from fair trade interactions, and I'm changing something. I pick, who I'm going to buy stuff from to support a lot of my local businesses. So I'm shifting a lot of my buying choices, or I guess that's right, so that I'm supporting things a certain way. And that's voice. Those are examples of voice. For me, a key part has been to not get overwhelmed with, well, what difference does that make? It makes a lot of difference. Just I may not see it from a whole systemic point of view for a while, but it still is a dance. It still is beauty. It still is voice. And then when you come together with like-minded people, whatever's real for you about that, it might get called a movement, but that's just a louder voice. And evolution keeps going and life moves to the next greater whole. And Tantra just described a phenomenally beautiful story where life was very whole in this regard for 4 days. 4 days. And that person's life is forever changed, and so is hers. And now she's telling you her story, and your life can be changed by hearing about that incredible beauty and functionality. So this exploration of what it is to have your voice and find your voice is, I think, a pretty rich one. Pretty rich.
Deb, can you share some of the things you're confronting?
Yeah, I think so. So the job that I've been in for a few years, not a super long time, but a few years, is ended, and the circumstances of that aren't really important. It wasn't my choice. I didn't exactly get fired, but it was a rearrangement of things. That's the short version. And I didn't agree with a lot of what the decisions to rearrange were based on. And they're not consistent with some of my values. And I really had the choice to be angry and, take them to court and whatever else I could have done. stirred up my colleagues with what's right, what's wrong, be on my side, and that's voice. That's actually voice also. But I looked at kind of the larger picture of what I thought that would do on one scale, would you call it? I guess. Yeah, that'd be completely legitimate. Most people, or a lot of people, would say, go for it, whatever. But I thought about it and I thought that's just going to weaken everything, including me. The stress of that much strife and anger, or creating division amongst my colleagues, which side are you on? Which in some ways was just kind of that wasn't as real as I don't think that would have been as real as I hoped in those moments of fantasy. But I just started thinking, well, what talks louder than that? What talks louder than what's in that fantasy? And I didn't let that fantasy last very long, by the way. What talks louder? And somebody, I think it might have even been you, Tantra, somebody put me in remembrance of Ho'oponopono, the Hawaiian practice of forgiveness. And I found this wonderful prayer online, on YouTube, of the original Ho'oponopono prayer. And it's much deeper than just, I forgive you. It's layers of, for every difficult interaction I've been in and only remembered the negative parts, I'm sorry. For anything that got in the way of yours and my mental health, mental well-being, I think she says, I'm sorry. I love you. It's I guess all of those are components of forgiveness. And I just started thinking, what would it be to live Ho'oponopono? What would it be to live that out? And it wasn't easy to manage my feelings, and including a lot of grief at it's time to leave these people, my clients, my colleagues. It's time to go. That was not easy. And keep doing the things I needed to do with impeccability of transferring my clients to new clinicians, whatever, documentation, whatever it was that needed done, and do it with impeccability and some measure of strength and honor. That became to me a voice, or what I was calling planting a seed, that will be in the mix of bringing everything to the next greater whole. It planted a seed to have some of the values behind those choices looked at. Or that's what I'm going to believe. And I think it's real. Will that show up anytime soon? I doubt it. I really doubt it, because the reasons for some of the choices was two things. One, it was all that we had access to, and those choices were made around what's the best for our clients. Ultimately, I don't happen to completely agree, but I'm not involved with everything that was part of the decision making. So I don't know completely. I realized that I just don't know completely. And that's not abdicating my view at all. It's just realized there might be more to the story. If I'm going to live in forgiveness, I have to allow for those sorts of things, at least in my view. So it's been a really fascinating journey to include all my emotions. Sometimes I could barely keep going with grief of letting go of my colleagues and my clients, and not, in my view, having made the most of what I could have with my colleagues, or at least that was a judgment I put on myself. I don't know if that's true or not, given everything, COVID and everything. I really don't know. But that was another part of it, is how much don't I know? What do I know? Well, what's in front of me now is finish this document. I know that, so do that. And then preparing for a new world. I'm literally in CreateAWorld with my life right now, literally. And I have a lot of parts to it that I do know, like the dreams, the hopes, the things I've stood for or hoped for decades, and those callings never leave me. They never leave me. So I've got all that, and I've got, what does that look like in form? What are the structures? Oh, wow, I have a lot more freedom to do structures now than I thought and than I used to. I've got, it's kind of like having a pile of Legos, and that's what I'm doing, is creating a world. And that's what's going on in, like my world, but it's not just me. I talk with Tantra, I talk with my family, I talk with a few other people. And now that one is definitely completing, it's become easy for me to start to reach out and talk with people. But I've been fascinated with the number of ways I have a voice inside of a kind of a thing I had no choice about. And I had no, I had no choice. So in a certain way, I had no voice. And then I found out the number of ways, oh, yes, I do have a voice, and quite a lot.
Just going to that topic we sent out on the MailChimp, there are things you didn't dare to do because the ramifications could have been bad for you, bad for your clients. It could have not gone away. That would have been according to your ethos, your relationship with life. But the other thing, Deb, is the other thing I want to bring into the equation is that this thing called evidence. With Joe, I haven't, he's doing whatever he's doing now. I may literally never hear from him again,
Right.
but inside that time, it was intact. I want to introduce intact. And you shared with me a couple of things your clients said to you, and that intactness is like evidence of a world. That's
Right.
the intactness. So, and it's I know it's delicate because of the perception people have when they're listening, but I'd like to frame, if you don't mind, a couple of things that your clients said to you upon your leaving, because it did give you a way to say, my relationship with them is intact, and it did create a world. It did do that, and they'll do whatever they do, but some of the, what I'm trying to say?
Not completely.
Like what they said about, where are you going, Deb? I want to go with you.
Oh, yeah.
She forgets certain things. I have to remind her, especially.
No, I wasn't quite sure what.
But you hadn't mentioned it up till now.
That's true. I hadn't. But there's a lot of pieces to this.
Yeah, I know.
So, I did have a few parents and caregivers and clients who said, "Where are you going next? Can I just move with you?" And well, I don't know. I'm creating that now, so that wouldn't have taken care of them. And a lot of the people that I've worked with have already had a lot of interruptions in caregiving. So anyway, turning them over to the next clinician and turning that to a positive change experience for them was what was more important. And that's, you know, excuse me, part of the training that I get. But, you know, that's also the kind of thing that until you got rubber meets the road and practice it, what you're trained in, it doesn't turn into lived experience till you're doing it.
Yeah. The thing I want to keep driving in this conversation, Deb, is like almost like a new awareness that popped up for me in our conversation. And that is one of the things that happens when you're in CreateAWorld, not this, but in any time there's a phenomenon of a world being created, is you begin to have language that captures something like Ho'oponopono captured it for Deb. It captures something. I was on a consult yesterday, and I was saying to her, Diane, Tony's wife, and I was saying to her, but listen to what's sense making to you, not logic, but sense making. So and she was talking about this one line that someone she listens to on YouTube, I think he's a holy man, but that one line holds her. It holds her. So I want to go, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot. I don't think you do. We have shared field. But just going back to that moment that any of those people said to you, can I go with you? Not the technical logic of it, Deb, but in that moment, there was a through line. Wasn't there a through line of something's intact here? Something I am with them is intact. Not what to do with it, but that it was either, I don't know the word, sufficient. It created a world for them that they might carry on, something like that.
Yeah, I think I get it. I think I get what I think I get it. So it did let me know that so like several parts here. So the world between me and my client and their family was working. So they want more of that. And so do I. And then and it's beautiful and sturdy, but then to shift it into now the world, the CreateAWorld is that you can carry that for them and me, because the world's not going to have the same configuration as you, me, and your family. That's a configuration. So then it becomes this part of the world is forming a new world, me, and I'm going off to whatever, and they are whole and complete in themselves with more progress that they want for who they're becoming. And that's great. They generated something complete for themselves. And they, including the courage it took to say, okay, I can hold that until I'm connected with whomever. And then I'll keep building my world. That was huge. That was really huge. That was just, I don't know how many of them got it consciously, but I felt it. I felt it, and I felt the seed get planted with each one of them, so that it'll show up. I guess I have a preference that it shows up consciously, but I don't suppose it matters. What matters is they were left with the power to create a world by learning whatever it is that was up for them. Like for a lot of my clients, learning to identify their emotions and express them constructively was, that was kind of a common thing, but the power that brings for them individually and in their associations created a world that they wanted, not the world that wasn't working for them. So there's just been a huge amount of power. And talk about conditions where it looks like things aren't going to work out, and they are working out. I see them working out. It may not look like it for what you can see with your eyeballs, but what I can see otherwise, you don't usually see a seed below ground anyway. But if I plant a tomato seed, I've got a pretty good idea of what the plant's going to look like, and I see it. And so yeah, so is that what you were looking for, Tantra? That's
Yes, I just
tremendous.
wanted the Deb voice of it, not the Tantra voice of it, and you gave it to me. Thank you.
Okay.
The other thing I want to bring forward in the what you said, you had said earlier, maybe in another talk, that sometimes your clients arrive at decisions in a way you would never think that was the way they should do it. And I remember when Joe came and explained to me what he was so elated. He was smiling. I wrote it on our WhatsApp thread. Joe's smiling. He hadn't been smiling for 4 days, and it's because he'd worked it out. He'd worked it out. He'd gotten the juggernaut loose, and he'd worked it out in a way. Now, whether it works out or not, this is the other key element. Listen, I need your help with this observation that I'm in, because I know a lot when I work with people, and especially when I was in spirals, begging people not to draw conclusions, because you miss the patterns of life unfolding. You draw a conclusion, like Deb is very careful to say, I see it. I recognize seeds. How it worked out in their consciousness, I don't know. That's legit. That is how we would pay attention. But the thing that in a phenomenon of unworkability, when things are collapsing, where there are things we dare not try to take on because we're at risk in those, or that we have no access to action, one of the most important things is that this moment when there's a clarity, that's like magic. That's like magic. Like Joe's clarity of what would work matters more than if it circumstantially ends up going it that way. That's what I'm trying to get at, Deb. And that's called consciousness. So when Deb was talking about the choices some of her teenagers made, and they wouldn't have been anything she would have ever done,
Mm-mm.
but it indicated they were becoming consciously conscious in their world. And they're creating in their world, not in a imaginary world that we might think they might need.
Right. And one of them was like the opposite of what we had just talked about the week before. So I've got all my thoughts of, okay, you didn't listen to me, and you know, I've got all these thoughts going on about what it means to be a good therapist. And then she explained her thinking behind it. And I was really thankful I hadn't said any of the things I was thinking, because it was perfect for her.
Yeah.
Absolutely perfect. And in that instance, it really wasn't about working out. She was actually using what she set up to train herself in something that she wasn't good at that time. And so it wasn't about, it would work out. Of course it would work out. Everything does work out. Whether we like how it works out or not is another story, or whether it's workable or what we call good or bad or whatever is another story. But it would work out because she'd be learning a tremendous amount about, like for her, this one part had to do with making friends and being willing to open up to other people. So she used a very carefully controlled situation, volunteering for something, to train herself in. Absolutely brilliant for her. And she'd get what she got out of it. Everything she got out of it would be what she needed. And then there'd be whatever was next for her. So I think I got reminded not to underestimate creativity.
The genius of a human being, regardless of circumstance.
Absolutely. The genius we each carry. And absolutely. Genius, creativity, and generativity that's inherent in what it is to be human. So cool.
When I was sitting in the parking lot with Joe, and it was such a mixed bag, because that he had the freedom to tell me what happened to his brother.
Yeah.
And because I had said to him, and do you blame yourself for not being able to help Julian? Julian now under the gun of some pretty bad stuff. And you having to leave, which is not the most, there's no way to protect your brother. And then he told me about the other brother that died. And I said, are you older than both of them? He said, yes. And he said, but my other brother, I'd actually pushed him in a tuff that we had right at the corner he died. And I said to him, well, what do you think about that? And he said, I said, do you think you need to be punished, or you are being punished for that? And he said, I worry sometimes about that. And I said, well, Joe, let's just go back to where your brother died, imaginatively, because this woman saw it, and she actually put up a billboard, a sign honoring him, his brother. And so we imaginatively went back to that moment, and he started crying. And I said, what happened? And he said, my brother doesn't want me to blame myself for what's happening in my family. And we're in Home Depot, sitting in the parking lot, crying. And I said, oh shit, Joe, we got to go in to get paint. And he says, well, you look like you've been crying, but I don't. And I said, okay, I'll put on my sunglasses. Here we go. And it was just that phenomenon of, and I want to bring this up for a very specific reason. It's so hard, everybody, to listen to us like we have an answer, or we're experiencing something to give you our wisdom. No, there is a wisdom rising. It isn't even our wisdom. It's the wisdom of creation itself. It's rising. We have to look at time. I'm a time queen in a way that everybody around me understands, and nobody knows what I'm doing, but they know it's real, And so the timing of Deb being let go her job because of a stupid rule they've got, literally is in timing of, we're finishing the Mind of Creation book, and we're rewriting and ending the Language of Creation book. And now she's freed up to do her part of writing the Architecture of Creation. The Architecture of Creation book. We really are moving into the winter. We really needed the yard done, and our person been helping us had blown the coop, and we really wanted our wall painted. And so there's the phenomenon of when something is collapsing, there also are things rising. Mm-hmm. And even though circumstantially we've spent some time having this conversation, just to be real, just to be in an honest relationship with life. That's the takeaway. How we stay on our feet. One of the possibilities for me is I just stay honest in my relationship with my life. Mm-hmm. That means if I'm in agony, I'm in agony. If I'm in joy, I'm in joy. If I'm stupid, I'm stupid. If I don't know how to, I don't know how to. I let it rip. But underneath it, something is rising. A wisdom, a becoming, a new world is rising because it is impossible for things to collapse without using the material of the collapse to rebuild a new world.
Mhm.
It's literally impossible. So Deb, I'll turn it over to you. We have about 4 minutes and then we'll close.
When you're saying that, I love compost, but that's how nature works. Things collapse. And I'm thinking of some of the fires in California right now. That's a big collapse from human point of view. That's a lot of destruction and deconstruction. And from a human point of view, and probably all the deer that are running so they don't get burned and whoever else, but it won't be long before there's a recursion where all that burning, all that everything is fodder for the new growth.
Yeah.
And that's the way it's been built. And I don't know if it was last year or the year before when we had some really bad fires here in California. There was just a lot of conversation around how much Westerners don't know about managing that sort of thing, that Indigenous people all over the place here in America, in Australia, whatever, they're familiar with how to do, I think it was called controlled burns.
Mhm.
And so it looks like they're deliberately destroying, but it's not. It's a process where it's both at the same time.
That's a real takeaway, Deb.
I think there's,
I'll say what the takeaway is. The takeaway is that I think we're moving towards having that geopathic mind. So what you just said was Indigenous people live in the mind of the earth. They live with the mind of the earth. And like, I want to go to Mora because I promised the land that's been burned here in New Mexico. I promised the land I'd come so there could be a communication between fire and water, just because it's mine to do, not to impose, but to do. And it turns out it's going to be raining on Thursday, the day I was going to go. And the truth is I shouldn't go because it floods because they have no trees. But that's the takeaway I'd like to leave. What's it call it? It's theater. I'll have to ask Janice. It's kind of like you leave them hanging.
yeah,
I can't think what the words are.
yeah.
Open-ended, because there's more when reality is rising to its next greater whole, and Deb has said this several times, we don't know what it looks like. And we really go back to the most fundamental parts of ourselves. And you said it also, Ho'oponopono. I care, I love, I forgive. Not as methods, but as what's natural to a human being. So Deb, close this off.
And then that has us get out of our way to both participate in and allow for what's rising. Because I actually think, and I'm thinking of some serious stuff that's happening in our world today, not just the light-hearted or less difficult things. Somewhere in there, we do know, and we really do have the creative, generative solutions. And I don't always enjoy the process of getting out of my own way, but eventually I realized it was, better. And I'm thrilled grateful for what's inherent in human beings, which is that genius that we've spoken about. So I'm really hoping that you all find that for yourself today. Notice that about yourselves and your life and your neighbors.
Yep. And we did slip a little bit into our point of view towards the end. So we apologize for that, but I think we did pretty good for most of it. Thank you, Deb.
Okay.
You and Janice have a good time.
Yep, next week.